President Trump really thought that when he came into office, he could get the Russians and the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. And once they were at a negotiating table, they could thrash out a deal. And the way President Trump works is he'll have an idea, he'll have a plan A, but if plan A doesn't work, he'll immediately move on to plan B.
The two biggest talking points from today's press conference between Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump were the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, with the two leaders taking a different view over recognising a Palestinian state. Starmer insisted that regardless of his disagreement with Trump, Hamas had no future in governance there.
Well, let me be really clear about Hamas. They're a terrorist organisation who can have no part in any future governance in Palestine. And what happened on October the 7th was the worst attack since the Holocaust. We have extended family in Israel. I understand firsthand the psychological impact that that had across Israel. So I know exactly where I stand in relation to Hamas. Hamas, of course, don't want a two-state solution. They don't want peace.
Well, that was Keir Starmer being asked about Hamas and the war between Israel and Hamas. We're joined by President Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor, Katie McFarland. Katie, a warm welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us. Look, there will have been a discussion behind closed doors, won't there, between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer about the UK's decision to recognise a Palestinian state. I wonder if Donald Trump was being very patient with Keir Starmer today, too patient with Keir Starmer even.
You know, I think that the bigger story is that the breadth of the relationship. So as President Trump said a couple of times, especially in his remarks in his speech last night at the state dinner, that we're close. I mean, we come from the same stock. We're a common country. We have common values. And when he was talking today, whether it was about Ukraine or whether he was talking about British recognition of a Palestinian state, those were not as important as the bigger picture relationship. And it's important to point out they're talking. Our leaders are talking now. It wasn't clear that the leadership level was talking in the previous administration. They may have been talking, cabinet officer to cabinet officer, but they were not talking principal to principal. And I think that to me is the big takeaway, is that we have a strong and enduring relationship. And as President Trump kept saying again and again and again, it's going to last for all time. This is our closest friend. We are the closest of allies. And the implication being, well, maybe we don't always agree on everything, but the bigger picture is that we are one.
Why is that bigger picture so important when the UK has, I mean, if you look at, the financial side of it, our military might, that's been an issue before. Mm-hmm. Why is it important to keep that relationship so strong? The US has, and this has been demonstrated during this state visit, the US has an awful lot more to give us than we to them.
Just to think about President Trump personally. So when he went into the Oval Office, and I went with him in that first week, those first couple of days of his first term, he took the bust of Winston Churchill, which has always been in the Oval Office in a prominent position. President Obama, President Trump's predecessor, removed it, put it in a closet somewhere. President Trump, the first thing he did when he sat down at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office was to say, I want that bust of Winston Churchill back. I want to see Winston Churchill's face when I'm talking every day and making my decisions in the Oval Office. When President Biden came in, he took the bust back out again. And again, the first thing that President Trump did when he came back in was to put us back. Now, busts are going back and forth, but I think it shows that President Trump always has wanted a very close relationship with the United Kingdom. And that in the first term, he was trying to negotiate a trade deal with the UK, with the idea that the minute the British left Brexit, the minute they left the European Union, that the United States would have a US-UK trade deal, which would be important to both of us. I think it's also why the first trade deal President Trump did in his second term was with Great Britain. Other countries wanted to be first, but it was Great Britain. And I think that was President Trump personally feeling a strong connection with Britain and speaking on behalf of the American people. We want that close relationship, right, even though it may not always be to our greatest advantage.
Yeah, which is an interesting dynamic. Look, let's get into some of the specifics of the news conference today. Many say that Donald Trump's the only world leader who has the ear of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's the only one who can convince him to stop the war. Donald Trump today saying he's someone who loves to end wars, 7 wars so far. We'll talk about Ukraine in a few moments, but I wonder on the issue of Gaza and what is happening there, how does he end the war between Israel and Hamas?
You know, what President Trump has said again and again is he wants the war to stop. But then he's also said in the last few weeks, he wants it to stop. Israel, do what you have to do to destroy Hamas, but do it quickly. And that's a slight difference of where things were, you know, certainly in the previous administration. It's almost as if they've concluded, well, Hamas isn't willing to go negotiate in good faith. They never were, they never will be. And when President Trump said today at that news conference, he said, well, Hamas is now talking about taking the hostages. Instead of releasing the hostages, they want to put the hostages as body armor in front of them so that the hostages are the first people killed. And when President Trump said, you know, we've not heard that before. To me, it was a signal that Israel, get rid of Hamas as fast as you can, but there's no negotiation to be had with a country that wants to put Americans and other citizens of other countries as hostages to take the bullets for them.
But that doesn't get us any closer to the end of the war in Gaza, does it?
Well, but you could make the argument, Kate, that are we any closer? Were we any closer before? And with Israel, the actions that Israel has taken against the various proxies of Iran, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the air defense systems in Syria, those have all been aimed at protecting Israel.
Yeah.
And
I suppose the
so
question is, Katie,
argument, where were we before? I don't think that we were anywhere near a peace agreement before.
But I suppose the question is that I'd put to you, if you were in Donald Trump's administration, if you were advising him, wouldn't you just say, do you know what, stop talking about ending the war in Gaza, because we're no closer to it. All it's going to do is provide a stick for Donald Trump's critics to beat him with if he doesn't achieve what he keeps saying he's going to do.
You know, I think he's been pretty clear. He wants the war to stop, whether it's Ukraine war, whether it's a potential war between India or Pakistan to never start, and certainly whether it's the war in the Middle East and Gaza. In all of his actions have been actions of peace. Go back to the Abraham Accords.
But he says he wants it
Israel
to stop. He says he is going to get it to stop. It's not just, everyone wants the war to stop, every world leader. But the difference is Donald Trump is saying he will make that happen, and it's just whether politically, based on your experience, he's actually better just to stop saying that, to stop making those assurances, because if we're no further along, why is he so sure that he's going to make a difference?
Well, if you look at every conflict he's ever dealt with, he's solved them all. So if this is a semantic argument of why should he even talk about this, look, peace means a big deal to Donald Trump. He wants to end the wars. He saw the pictures of what happened on October 7th. And if he's basically saying, well, we want this is a priority for the United States. But at the same time, he's saying, but Hamas needs to be destroyed. I think that speaks for itself.
Okay, let's talk about Donald Trump saying that Vladimir Putin had let him down. What does he mean? And then where does that go to? What does that translate to in the future?
I think President Trump really thought that when he came into office, he could get the Russians and the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. And once they were at a negotiating table, they could thrash out a deal. And the way President Trump works is he'll have an idea, he'll have a plan A, but if plan A doesn't work, he'll immediately move on to plan B. And sometimes people will say, oh, he's pivoting or he's changed his mind. No, he's not. He's got the end goal that he wants to end the war in Ukraine. But at the same time, he wants to do it in such a way that we, the United States, have a relationship with Russia at the other side of that war. In other words, we're a global power, but the United States and President Trump have said time and again is China's our big problem. And what we don't want to have is a Russian-Chinese alliance aimed at the United States. So how you end the Ukraine war is something that President Trump wants to do, and still have a good relationship with Russia at the other end of it. Listening to what he said in the last few days and his increased frustration, he's one of the things that I think is a sticking point where other countries have said to him, European countries, well, what are you going to do about Ukraine? What are you going to do about Ukraine? Well, he's already gotten our European allies, our NATO allies, to increase defense spending. And thank you, Great Britain. You're there. You're right there at the head of the pack. But at the same time, he said, why should the European countries continue to buy oil and gas from Russia? They're paying for the war. The purchases that European countries are making, not Britain as much, but others, are still making of Russian oil and natural gas are what's giving Russia the money to pursue this war. Okay. And so that's why he's talked about, everybody has to put sanctions on Russia and then enforce them.
Just finally, President Trump also made a surprise announcement today regarding Afghanistan.
They just went through the Afghanistan total disaster for no reason whatsoever. We're going to leave Afghanistan, but we're going to leave it with strength and dignity. And we're going to keep Bagram, the big air base, one of the biggest air bases in the world. We gave it to them for nothing. We're trying to get it back, by the way. Okay, that could be a little breaking news. We're trying to get it back because they need things from us. We want that base back. But one of the reasons we want the base is, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons.
Is this an expected decision that Donald Trump now has his eye on a former US military site in Afghanistan? Is this another diversion?
Diversion? No, I think it was breaking news. I think that I was surprised to hear it. What it sounds like is that we're having some kind of a negotiation with Afghanistan. And
with the Taliban, probably.
Maybe, but
Yeah.
I mean, presumably that is.
Yeah.
But when he said we're going to try to get it back, I'm not sure what he meant by that. I don't think he's ready to make any definitive statements other than we've got our eye on it and we're talking about it and maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, he's talked about it being an important foothold because of its proximity to China. And this is something that Western nations have a really close eye on, the relationship between China and the United States. So this may cause concern amongst other nations. Who knows? Look, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate your counsel on this one. Katie McFarland, who is President Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Kate.